over 10 years. And I am the Senior Manager of Parent and Family Engagement at Include. And I am here to share with you some strategies on, or have a discussion about behaviors, and also hopefully discuss and work with and hopefully we'll be able to work through some strategies that you can implement, or you can help parents implement if you find yourself being a professional on this call today, in the home. As Timothy mentioned, the pandemic has been, it's been a very strenuous time for all of us. And it really has turned, the tides really have turned for a lot of our parents, in that they are now, since March of last year, have taken on the dual role of not just being parents, but also assuming a lot of responsibilities as teachers or educators in the academic sense of the word. So hopefully you'll find some of the information that I shared today somewhat useful, or useful for in the work that you're doing with either parents or with each other. So I think I can share my screen. I'm going to go. Oh, I don't think I can.
Sorry, I'll make you a co-host right now.
Okay, thank you.
It should be.
Okay, I see it now. Yep. All right, and just let me know if you're able to see the PowerPoint. I think you should be able to. Okay. So thank you for that, Timothy. Okay. All right, so let me just, I guess, start with just giving you a little bit of a snapshot of the many other programs that allow us to work in the community. As Timothy mentioned, he'll be sharing some of our, a link to some of the workshops that we have in the coming months. And also, hopefully, you'll be able to also view our menu of existing workshops that you can tap into if you're interested, and maybe offering some of these for specific schools that you oversee, so that we can bring some of the content to your parents. But just a quick snapshot of who we are. We are considered a family and community engagement center, and we work in all the 5 boroughs. For the last 3 decades, we have been working with families as well as professionals in helping them better understand their rights, and also the steps that they can take to access special education services. And that's from establishing eligibility all the way to accessing and helping to address specific needs that their children have by way of special education services and programs. We cover the ages of 0 to 26, and and some of the many different ways that we go about supporting some of the work is through us as a FACE center, which is a little different than the DOE's FACE department, in that this is funding that we get from the state to be able to work directly with parents as well as professionals in a different context. And then we also have other programming that allows us to work within the communities of the South Bronx, as well as North Manhattan. We have an IncludeNYC initiative, which is an initiative aimed at working directly with Spanish-speaking families. And I'll walk you through the many different ways that we go about supporting some of our families as well as our professionals. But that IncludeNYC initiative, which is aimed at working with Spanish-speaking families, is also extends across all the boroughs, including Staten Island, just like us as a family and community engagement center are able to do. And then we have some youth programming that allows us to connect young people between the ages of 16 and 26 with a youth educator who will work with them closely to help them either refine a goal, and that can be a vocational goal, that can be a an academic goal, or that could just be goals that tie in with them wanting to gain greater independence. And that title of that program is Project Possibility, and that's another program that is that allows us to do a little bit more youth-facing work um, in the community. So this is just some statistics for 2019. Um, as you can see, some of our we've broken it down by the most requested topics in both workshops and via our helpline. Much of the work again that we do is focused on special education process, helping parents establish compliance within the IEP, as well as helping them prepare for meetings, school placement issues, evaluation processes, camp referrals, navigating systems, and then some of the top workshops that we have presented on have been focused on understanding your child's IEP, advocacy skills, intro to transition planning, and so forth. And I will share this presentation with Timothy, and then he can get it out to you all, I think, if that's okay. Okay. Again, these are some of the many ways that we go about connecting with the community. One is through our helpline, which is available in English and in Spanish. If you know of any families that you're working with that speak languages other than English or Spanish, you can still refer them to our helpline. What we have access to is the language line, which is a service that allows us to connect with a third-party interpreter who will help us um, establish a dialogue with a parent who, again, speaks a language other than English or Spanish. We also present workshops similar to the one that we're going to be presenting today. And I shared some of the details on the prior slide. And then again, we have some family engagement and youth programs, such as our IncludeNYC initiative that allows us to work specifically with Spanish-speaking families, and then our youth programs, Project Possibility, where we get to connect directly with young people who have specific goals in mind. And then lastly, we have a new electronic newsletter known as the Navigator, and then we have it in Spanish as well, El Navegador, which is which allows families to subscribe, and then they get uh, during the pandemic, we were doing it weekly. Actually, we were sending out information via our both newsletters um, to keep families informed on things that were happening in the community that were directly connected to the pandemic. And we're still we're still doing so. Where things are ever changing all the time. Um, I know that something really major happened on the DOE on Friday, so so you guys can relate to all the changes and all the many unexpected things that can just pop up, right? So I will also forward you, and I think I probably could do it here. I could share with you the link to our website, so you can go ahead and take a look and familiarize yourself with some of the work that we have going on. Okay, so these are just some of the learning objectives that we're going to cover today. Today's overall theme is going to be challenging behaviors. And what our hope is that you'll walk out of this session having a better sense of behavior and what it means, or what it communicates, and the form and the function that it serves. We want to try to help parents kind of view it from this perspective a little bit more. And I think this conversation also kind of allows parents to kind of dive a little deeper into a new way of thinking of behaviors. And I think that, and our hope is that you'll walk out feeling some sense of having been reminded of some of the principles that you may have already been exposed to. So by all means, you're not probably if many of you are professionals in the DOE space, probably sure that not all of this information is going to be completely new to you. And just, if anything, use it as an opportunity for it to serve as a refresher for you. The other thing is utilizing, hopefully you'll be able to walk out with one strategy to help you manage behavior at home or to help you support some of that in the homes. And then one or two strategies to help prevent or manage some of the behaviors that many of us may find challenging. So let me go ahead and before we dive into a little participation from you all, I'd like to just acknowledge that these are, and I acknowledged it before I actually began the presentation, but acknowledging that these are very stressful times for so many of us. Um, I personally think that being at home isn't all it's cracked up to be. Um, I remember, it's always that saying, the grass is greener on the other side. Sometimes isn't the case. Um, and I always thought, maybe working from home this was before the pandemic. I wonder what it would be like to work from home. Now that I'm in this situation, I don't know if it's the best. Um, so I could only imagine being in, having to work from home or having to be home and having to manage your tasks related to work, and then also serve as the back end or as the support for the academic work that your children are engaging in or trying to engage in. Because I think there's such of there's such a there's also this big kind of elephant in the room of supporting our children in a way that's going to also help them to continue to feel engaged in the work. One thing is we want to help them understand and learn the material, but we also want them to feel engaged and we want them to not feel overwhelmed. Um, so I just want to recognize that this has kind of been, I think we can all kind of relate with each other that this has not been a walk in the park, as they say. So before we get into this into this into this into this into this quote, I'd like to ask you all to kind of just take a moment and think back to a time when you were. Now, you're gonna have to go back a little bit, and I want you to think of a time when you found yourself in trouble. Um, and I want you to think about maybe what you were trying to communicate to the people in authority. And by people in authority, I mean maybe your parents or your caregivers, whoever that may have been. But I want you to take a moment just to think about that. And I'd like you oh, here we go. We have somebody chatting. And yes, I don't know. I like to get, I don't want to refer to you as a number. 26, 260101.
I don't even know how that happened. I'm Jasmine.
Jasmine, how
Jasmine
are
Bond.
you?
I'm doing good. I'm very happy to be here. That's the first time I've ever seen that number.
Oh, okay. Principal
I
Gonzalez?
yeah, I just changed her name.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah,
You
I
can
just
call me
didn't want to refer to you as the number.
No, you can call me Jasmine.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Fix that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for also acknowledging, and recognizing and sharing your thoughts and feelings about the predicament in which, or the situation in which many of our parents are finding themselves in. Um, so I wanted to also, so going back to the question of to the reflection piece. Can anyone just share out a time when they thought they were when they got in trouble for something that they did or acted on? And then I want you to share with us, what was it that you were trying to communicate in that moment? And I could start if you'd like. There was there were many times in my childhood where I was not the I was not what you would call an ideal, well-behaved child. But I will say that reflecting back on my behaviors, my mom worked a lot. She worked in a factory, and if you have and this is, we're talking about the '80s, so that's when factories were booming in Brooklyn. And my mother was working very hard, and my mother worked 6 days a week. So she really only had Saturday off. And then by the time she got off of work, she was very, I mean, those were different working conditions than the ones that, many of us find ourselves in today. But it was very taxing on her body. So much of the time when she got out, she was really tired. And then that was when I thought we would have spent some quality time. So when I didn't see it, I would I would engage in certain behaviors that I think at the time were really just because I wanted to get her attention, any which way I could. So I would break things. So I would sometimes, I remember I remember I remember throwing some things out the window that I should not have thrown. um, but again, from my perspective, it was really to gain her attention, in my own way. So that's one example, and I like to hear from everyone else, or for maybe one or two volunteers.
And this is of just a time when you really just wanted some attention.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, God, I was really young, but I used to have an old payphone that you put coins in. My dad, I don't know where he got it from, but that used to be like a toy of mine. So when one day I had spent so much time playing on this little phone and talking to pretend people and whatever and practicing 911 and this and that. So one day I went to our real house phone and I called 911 and it shocked me because they were just so serious when they picked up the phone that as a kid it scared me. And so I hung up the phone, but they traced it and they called back. And my sister got to the phone before me and was like, hello. And they were like, well, we think someone just called us from this number. Um, uh, can you check around the house? Is everything okay? Blah, 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 blah. So of course they call my mom, they call my dad, like the whole family's in an uproar. And I was just sitting there like, oh my God, like it wasn't even a real fire. Like I totally should not have been playing on the phone. But I didn't realize the seriousness of it. And ooh, was I tore up.
Thank you, Timothy. Now did you do that with the intentions of, were you just being curious?
I was just curious. I just wanted to see like what, because I had been spending so much time playing on the fake phone that I really wanted to see like, okay, well, what's it like if you really call these people? Like, what do they do?
Right. Thank you for sharing that. That's
And I found out.
So, hi, this is Monse. Can you hear
hi.
me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share something. I was in third grade and both of my parents were working, like you shared, very hard and doing what they were supposed to do. So my grandmother would take care of us. It happened to be a parent-teacher conference. And I lied and I said that the letter grade that I got an F for my gym class. And I lied and I said to my grandmother in translation that that meant F for fabulosa.
Ah, thank you.
So I did that because I guess I did want attention from
Mhm.
them, from my parents. And I knew that they couldn't be there. So I insisted, and I didn't really want to talk to my grandmother in Spanish. So I guess that was me being naughty by giving the wrong information as I translate, which is why I tell parents today, don't have your children translate for you
Mm.
because they won't tell you the whole truth.
Yeah, that can be, that's a concern. But you know what's interesting about is what you just shared about you kind of tagged it as being naughty, but but meaning that your behavior was, you engaged in a naughty act. But it sounds like you also, but you led with you possibly having done that because you were looking for some attention.
Yeah.
So I think the reason why I asked everyone, and thank you all for volunteering, and even if you haven't, and you're thinking about a time in the past, thank you for doing that. I think that the purpose of this quote is to also is to highlight that that very often, we'll attribute certain behaviors that our children engage in, um, to to uh, to our children being bad kids. Um, and one of the I've been to so many trainings on behavior management, and one of the I don't know if if any of you are familiar with the iceberg. Have you seen it? Right. So
Yes.
thank you. So yeah, the iceberg is like one of those visuals that allows you kind of just to consider that what you see on the surface is only only the tip, and there's so much hidden underneath. And it's hard to do that, like to think that way. If and it's kind of one of those things that I think you have to practice, um, so that you don't fall into this, like, downward spiral where every time you see your child engaging in an act that you find, or that you will label challenging, you don't end up thinking that, oh, they're just being a bad kid, or you're being naughty. Think it's about getting into the habit of thinking, what is it that this behavior is trying to communicate to me? um, and I say it again. I was one of those kids that, you could have, in high school, you could have probably labeled me as a bad kid. um, but there was definitely a lot of other things going on internally that were driving some of those behaviors. So, thank you all of you for having participated. So let's take a look at the definition of what it means to, what challenging behavior is. Now, this comes from the DOE's pyramid model training, which is a model really aimed at better understanding challenging behaviors within a younger demographic. But if you read if you read the actual, definition here, it actually can be applied to a pretty wide range of age groups. It isn't isolated to just children, per se. Um, so, so from your perspective, when you think about behaviors, what is it that comes to mind, um, or how do you go about kind of, um, when you think of the term behavior?
Alfonso, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, what comes to mind when you think of the word behavior, without having this very, dense definition of challenging behavior?
I don't necessarily myself connect behaviors to a negative situation. I think behaviors are part of our makeup, and depending on the lessons we've learned or the nurturings that we receive, the guidance, that would dictate some of our behaviors.
Okay. Anyone else want to share their insights on or their perspective on how they see behaviors? There's no right or wrong.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree. It's just the way people act in general. And I think, then how you categorize that, if you're witnessing someone else's quote unquote behavior, it's like, okay, well, whenever we're in a grocery store, I'm witnessing this. Whenever we're at church, I'm witnessing this. It's like the behaviors are modified based on the surroundings to some degree. There are some that are always the same, and then there are some behaviors that change depending on the surroundings.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Absolutely. So I think that, for our purposes, this definition kind of helps to also paint the picture of behaviors also as being observable things. And I think very often, at least sometimes when we get calls from parents sometimes we get calls on our helpline, to be honest with you, um, where parents are just looking to have somebody hear them out. They're just feeling, so much frustration maybe about having their children engage in remote learning that they're now, themselves experiencing some fatigue of over trying to work so hard at getting them to focus on the work. But and sometimes what they'll do is that, as if we go back, they'll if we go back to the slide or to what we were discussing earlier, which is the idea that, not that there are no bad kids. It's just the idea that emotions and feelings, and there's a whole bunch of needs that drive some of those behaviors, are not always taken into consideration. So they always tend to refer to not the objective, not to the behaviors, but they tend to always put a judgment behind the behaviors that they're sharing out with us. And what this definition does, I think, is that it does a nice job of just trying to, or it's doing its best of trying to help us be a little bit more objective in and how we articulate what it is that we're seeing. And then if we do that, and hopefully the hopes is that if we do that, then we'll have something observable, objective, that we can report out on. And then we can get into this whole concept of, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, and then try to break it down so that way we can get into getting to we can get to a place where we can understand what is it that's driving the behavior. And I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the term trigger. What's triggering it, what is it that's driving it, and what is it that I'm seeing, and then what is it that happens immediately after to either reinforce that particular behavior that we're witnessing, because sometimes I think we may be doing things that are counter, that we think are going to counteract that behavior, but instead it's kind of fueling it. And I think that the ABCs of behavior, again, just beginning to train our brains to think about behaviors in a specific way, is going to help us in building the framework for then recognizing that there's something that's happening before the behavior occurs, and then what is it that I'm doing to either reinforce that behavior or help to prevent it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So before we move on to some of the functions, let's see if is there a parent on the line, or is there both a professional and a parent on the line who has ever used the ABCs of behavior to help them kind of manage behaviors at home?
Good. How are you?
No, is this a new concept for many?
I don't know, Alfonso, but you know what? I would say just call on them. Let's see who unmutes that microphone.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. All right. Let's call on Irma Rodriguez. Is everyone here a Spanish? I'm sorry, an English speaker, or do we? Could
No,
we?
I think I think so far, because she comes to, I think, she comes to a lot of our workshops. I think everybody's good. I've been watching the names so far.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hi, Ms. Batista.
Hi, how are you? So the
Hi.
ABC model, are you using the model for people places?
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
The ABC model that you are presenting, is this model the same model for people places?
It might be. I don't know people places.
Okay.
But this is definitely a framework that exists and built in within different models.
Correct.
They may be. You may see them. You may see them under different language, but it's pretty much the same. It follows the same principles.
Correct. Because for every behavior that a child displays, there is an antecedent. What triggered that behavior? It's like a chain reaction. It's basically
Right.
once you see it from the outside, it is the same reaction. something triggered that child that caused the behavior, and then as a parent, we need to provide a consequence to that behavior.
Right. And I think District 7, if I'm remembering correctly, there was some conversations of bringing in therapeutic crisis intervention, that model, into some schools. And um, so thank you, Ms. Batista, I think it was. Um, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And yes, so that's it. So that model, the therapeutic crisis intervention model, is a perfect example of a model that that follows these very same principles, but but the language they use looks very different. But it does recognize that there are triggers that influence certain behaviors, whether good or bad, um, and then it does recognize that there has to be some uh, some consequence or something that comes from having behaved in a certain way. So all right, let's see. Is there anyone else that would like to share their thoughts on the ABCs of behavior? So I think that I'm thinking also how interesting it is to think of this framework, or to look at it from also from our perspective as adults. There's one thing that I in my work life that I find um, that can really throw my day off, and that's when uh, when somebody when I have something planned, when I have my day planned, and then my boss says, "Oh, I need something, I need a report like before the end of business," and then I didn't have it as part of my to-dos, so then it kind of throws me off a little bit. And I'm thinking that things sometimes, very often, things that bother us as adults also tend to have the same effect on our children. And one of the things that we've tried to do to help some of our parents in helping to manage some of these behaviors has been to encourage them to create a schedule for them throughout the week, and to plan the days out. That way there isn't anything that's going to throw them off, and at least they have there's some clear expectations on what the week or the days are going to look like for them. And that's kind of another way of also helping to manage some of these triggers. And maybe that is a trigger. Um, just having having just having being able to know and understand what the week is going to look like, or what the day is going to look like. I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but even in your work life, I mean, just what happens when things don't go as you thought they were going to go for the day or the week.
I think it's a daily occurrence that the day doesn't go exactly as I as I planned. There's you, especially at the district office. I mean, and I think for many of the people on the line, whether you're a parent or a DOE employee, the weeks are not going as you would normally have planned for them to go, right?
Right.
Because elementary schools are open, middle schools have open, but then there were some cases with teachers, and now there are some schools that are reclosed just this few short days later. It's everything is in such a state of flux right now. But I think in general, even when you create a really solid plan of what you'd like to accomplish, there are other priorities that come along that kind of overtake what it is that you were planning on doing for the day. I'm sure there are parent coordinators on the line that can relate to, having a plan of
Absolutely.
parent outreach, but then your principal is your guide for the day. There are other things
Mhm.
that are happening that you have to respond to in the moment.
Yes, thank you, Timothy, for that. I definitely agree, especially during these times where things are so uncertain. Um,
Mhm.
where I mean, I don't know where we're going to be in the summer. I hopefully we'll be in a better place than we are today. But but parents are even now still thinking about about summer camps, and whether they're going to be in person or remote, um, or whether there's going to be a hybrid. So I think that and I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is because just in terms of our children and being in this remote space, um, for a trigger may be just uncertainty for our children, not knowing what the day is going to look like. And one proactive strategy to help manage that is to create some type of schedule so that children can be in a better position to deal with their feelings and emotions, about what to expect, or at least they'll be better prepared. And then the behavior is that observable thing. Yes, somebody was going to add something. I'm sorry. Okay, and then behavior is that observable thing that we can see, right? The action happening. It would be really good if we can get into help our families be in a better position to define it, to describe the behavior, because it can be a measurable. It can be measurable, or it is measurable because we can tell when it happens, when it ends, how often it occurs, um, and also objective because it's not open to interpretation. And I think that's what I was trying to point out earlier, which was sometimes we fall prey to wanting um, to just put a judgment call on that behavior, when in reality all we need to do is try to get into the habit of just describing and jotting down, if we can, what is it that you're seeing, again, how often does it happen, the frequency, and then when it begins and when it ends, and what was happening prior to. And then that can help us be in a better position to establish some consequences. The consequence can determine if the behavior is going to continue, or if it's not, or if it's not when you're thinking about the consequences. So let's go ahead and let's move to the functions of behavior, which is another, I think, concept that can also help us, many of our families think about, you know, challenge our families to think about what it is that we're seeing. So one is that a behavior can be can be feel good for a child. Um, it depends, of course, on what it is. It can be a matter of establishing some attention, or maybe eliciting some power. So and the attention can be given to the child, and that can be in a positive or negative. Um, but I think the important thing here is to recognize is that it's not whether it's so much about whether the acknowledgement is positive or negative, as much as it is that from the perspective of the child, they're receiving it. So even if it's negative attention, so even if I'm getting yelled at, the fact that I'm getting that attention is worth it for me. So I'm going to continue to do it. And I think power is also another concept that can be broken down into a child's needs for possibly a few things, but here are just three. One is seeking greater independence, seeking some autonomy, and even some control. And maybe this is true for maybe a little bit older children who are looking to establish a little bit more autonomy, from their parents. And I'm thinking, what this would look like in the remote space. Has anyone, can anyone, has anyone come by an example of of what this would look like in the remote learning space? I could think of one, but I'm just curious to see if you guys have any. No, not a one. All right, I'm gonna have to default to Timothy's suggestion, and let me ask Ms. Miranda, Ana Miranda. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Sí, diga.
Hola, señora. ¿Usted habla inglés o español?
Hi, can you repeat?
Oh, yes. Okay, both.
English?
English and violin. Okay, so I just wanted to I wanted to get an example of these two these two dynamics that may be these two dynamics that are listed on this slide, one being about attention and the other one being about power. And I gave it, and I was just saying that sometimes, you know, whether the feedback that our children are getting are negative or positive, they are going to, the most important thing to recognize is that they're receiving the attention. So therefore, maybe it's reinforcing that behavior. And then the power can be broken. And then the idea of power and having some autonomy and control and independence can be something that can be the driving force behind the behavior that you're seeing. So I'm curious to see if you had an example of this taking place in the remote learning space.
Positive or negative?
Either one, whatever you have witnessed. You don't have to make anything up. Whatever you have witnessed.
Whatever I think. Okay. In the negative aspect is that mainly most of the kids feel that they are not connecting with their peers, so they
Mhm.
might be acting up.
Absolutely.
And this is the way that they get the control over the classroom meetings when the teachers are connected. In the positive way, is like the students will like to contribute to all the attentions of the teacher and do all the work, and this will work independently and they feel good and proud of themselves.
Right. That's a great example. And you had a few examples in there, but I'm thinking about just the simplest one, which is not being able to connect to your peers.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of, falls under the, I think the umbrella of attention, like, um, and I'm thinking also just in terms of also wanting some autonomy. And we always encourage our parents to just to remember that, to build in some breaks within the learning day, and or in other words, building some breaks from the screen throughout the day, and recognize that, like, one of the things that I've come to acknowledge about myself as a parent is is that immediately after my son is done with school at 2 o'clock, that doesn't mean that he has to immediately go and finish his homework now. I have to build in a break in there because otherwise he's going to burn out.
Yep.
Right. So remember this, we're thinking about what the functions of certain behaviors are. And these are just some examples, and I'm sure you guys could probably come up with many more. But these are just some examples that we have kind of identified as happening um, in some cases. So thank you so much for that. Uh, Ms. Angela, do you want to share? I see you turn on your camera. So are you looking to give some feedback or no? No? Okay. All right. Well, it's nice seeing you anyways, even just visual. Um, okay. So the other example is, you know, um, is medical. Maybe it's a medical, or maybe it has to do with the child's disability. Sometimes the function of a behavior can be a result of a condition, whether it be a medical condition, a disability. It can be something that has to do with a physical thing. Can also affect the child's behavior. For example, they may have challenges with their fine and gross motor development, and maybe can be showing some behaviors out of frustration when asked to do an activity that they're having a difficult time engaging in. It can be a sensory issue. The child's behavior can be caused by being either overly stimulated, and that can come by way of having just too much input, or they can be understimulated and just could be a result of too little input. Um, and then lastly, escaping. The child simply doesn't want to do the task and is looking for a way out. So he or she could be bored, want to escape for a more exciting activity, which is why, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, is that we encourage parents to build in some breaks throughout the day, especially when it comes to remote learning. Remote learning, no matter how hard we try, I hate to put it out there, but it's not the most it's not the same as learning in person. It's not the most exciting. I mean, I mean, think about the dynamics even in this session. If we were in person, it would be a whole. It would change. It would change the dynamic somewhat. And maybe I could see you in person, and then you won't be able to. Then you won't be able to just turn off your screen. I could see you all, and I could point at you, and I could say, "Hey, why don't you tell me a little something here and there?" And then you'll probably be more inclined to do so. So I think it's just interesting the whole function, how behaviors, the functions of behavior. Does anyone have anything to add or anything to share before we move on? And Timothy, I don't want to go over, so please, how long do I have for this? I don't want to take.
I'm still here. I'm still here, bro. 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move it along. All right, so addressing challenging behaviors at home. One of the things we do is that we say, as I mentioned before, every behavior has a function, and of course, recognizing and doing the work, the pre-work to understand what the function is going to really allow a parent or a professional who is working with a parent, help them establish a logical consequence. You will be in a better position to put forth, a clear direction or redirection in that if you find yourself having to redirect a child to a different activity or a task. But just make sure you have that and a few, maybe a couple, in your back pocket, so that it can work very well. Teaching a replacement skill, checking your own behavior. I think this is another area where we sometimes don't. I've been to so many different workshops on behaviors, and sometimes that isn't covered enough. But recognizing that you can set the tone for the day, and you can also set the next steps on how your child is going to respond to the intervention. And that's why we mean check your own behavior, and be a model for your child so that they are not, so that they don't find themselves, um, um, so that they can model some of the behaviors that you're displaying with your child, with yourself in yourself. And then lastly, get professional help. So if you're a parent, we always encourage them to. That's why we always encourage strong communication between them, the parents and the school system. You can have a functional behavioral analysis. You could have a assessment rather, that can morph into a behavior intervention plan that can be used by both in the classroom and at home. And we encourage parents to seek out the help from professionals so that they can get the support that they need. And then this is another quote that we use, just noting that every child needs at least one adult who is crazy about them, just the way our parents were crazy about us. I'm sure our parents, I know my mom reflects back now and she's like, very thankful that things turned out the way they did. I'm sure, Timothy, your parents think the same thing. They're very proud of you. And they're like, remember that time? Right? Or your siblings, remember that, Timothy?
Yeah, when they almost strung me up outside for the neighbors to see. Yes, exactly.
That's right. um, and then let's take a look at some ways that we can go about preventing challenging behaviors. And I think we touched a little bit on these. So here are some verbal, visual, and social emotional strategies. The one verbal one is the grandma's law, which is first you finish this. For example, first you finish this, and then you get access to that. So of course you would have to use the you would have to figure out what activity it is that you would like them to finish. So for example, first I want you to complete one chapter out of the book that you're supposed to read for the week today, and then you can watch TV. And of course, put some limits on that, because if if your intentions are not for them to just finish one chapter, watch, and then watch TV the rest of the afternoon, then don't just leave it open-ended like that, right? You'd have to be very explicit. Using iMessages when communicating also is very important. Let them know exactly what it is that you expect of them. Setting rules and expectations ahead of time. I always say, don't try to set rules and expectations in the moment. My mom was notorious for that. She would tell me things. She would change the rules, but they were like, but that's old school. That's last minute. All of a sudden, I thought we were going to do this and that, and then it turned out to be something completely different.
I'm actually like that
Yeah.
because sometimes I decide to, to kind of punish. You say like no phone at this point, but then again, when it teaches at certain time, I mean, and then you just forget about it. So yeah, I think I'm struggling with that. How to prevent some there. I'm really struggling.
Yeah.
Like
So.
when it comes to, when it comes, you want to kind of discipline, but then you're not firm. Like for example, I've said no phones after 9 o'clock, and then you just find yourself past 9 o'clock, you still have the phone. So yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah, you know what's funny about that, or what brings it brings me back to a time when I have a younger cousin whose mother whose mother was struggling in getting him to physically go to school. He was in high school,
Right.
and then when I and then she would say she would take away his game consoles at the time. She would take them away, and that would be his loss of a privilege for not following her rules, which were that he had to go to school. Um, and then when I tried to intervene and make and as a cousin, I went in to intervene and try to make the rule a little bit more to try to make the consequence a little bit more long lasting, so that he can truly understand that this was serious.
Mm.
She would always go back and say, and she would interject and say, he already promised me that he was going to not do that again. So let's say, for example, she took it away at 3 o'clock, the console, like the privilege, she would remove at 3 o'clock. By 5, she would give it back, because by then he had already promised her that he would go to school, for example, in his case. But your example kind of reminds me of her example, because she struggled for another good couple of years in getting him to finish high school, because she would break her own rules. So the consequence that she built into in his situation was not long lasting. So he never really took it seriously. And it's hard. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's not easy to sometimes stick to your guns, like as they say. But it's important to recognize that you want that to be long lasting. So you want there to be, if you say that you're gonna lose a certain privilege for a week, you can't break it. You have to stick to that week. Otherwise, it's gonna take away from the. It's gonna work against you rather than for you. But you're right, Angela. I think like you said, it's hard. It's not easy sometimes. I have the same challenges at home too. Sometimes my son he'll miss a homework, but we have, and then we'll take a privilege away. So, but we're pretty good at sticking to the plan. Providing clear and explicit choices, no more than 2. So that's in the event that you're, that you're seeing a behavior that you are finding challenging, but you want them to, and again, you want to redirect them to a couple of other alternatives to draw attention away from whatever it is that's causing the behavior to who that's eliciting the behavior. We always say provide clear and explicit choices, and no more than 2. So don't give them so many options. One example that I can think of is, you know, someone who doesn't want to log on for their related service, for example, um, because they are maybe feeling just overwhelmed that day because they had too much screen time, but they're not communicating that to the parent, right? It's up to us again to look at the ABCs of behavior and think about what is it that actually triggered, the behavior. What is it that's triggering them to not want to log on? And maybe it's just a matter of them needing a break, or maybe it's just a matter of them needing to engage in an activity that's going to be relaxing to them, or that is going to be enjoyable. So those would be two examples or two options that can be given to that individual, with the understanding that first then you would after you've completed that or engaged in whatever task you opted for, you'll then go ahead and engage in the session with the related service provider. And I'm just using that as an example, but it could be anything else. Visually, also setting time limits for activities, providing a visual schedule, and using a scripted or social stories also can be very useful in helping to prevent some of these behaviors. But I think, again, one of the simplest things is just to draft a set of expectations, create some type of calendar. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be something as simple as something on paper where the young person can follow easily, and they'll be ready to engage in the activities for the day or for the week. Okay, some considerations when preventing challenging behaviors. Also think about the environment. Try not to focus too much on the behavior, but try to focus on what it is that's happening. We're going back to that iceberg visual, right? The behaviors are what you see at the tip of the iceberg, and everything else is underneath. So try to focus more on the feelings and the needs. And if you get those, then you will be in a better position to manage the actual behavior, which is what you're seeing. Give them words to express themselves, play with them when appropriate, and remind them every day of how great they are, because I think that's always important. I'm not gonna lie. I wish my mom would have been a little bit more praising of how great I am when I was a kid, but that was not her style. But then again, my mom had to be both my father and my mother. Those were and in retrospect, and now she tells me these things.
And it changes the dynamic of what's going on in the home.
It does. It does, absolutely. It's so interesting, like to read it, to understand behaviors now as a professional, and to take a moment to like reflect back on your childhood and your adolescence, and it's like you get so much. The insight is just unbelievable.
That's right.
That you get.
It's
These
true.
are just some examples. I'm not going to go through them since we have so much limited time. So let's just go ahead, if it's okay, Timothy, just to share one thing that you learned today and that you would like to implement
Definitely.
before we wrap up. I'll take some volunteers. We have 17 people on here.
The
I just-
affirmations that you just shared at the end, I think that's definitely something I want parents to practice more. To not focus so much as a negative behavior, but to also check themselves, right? To see where they're at before they react to the situation, and to try to listen to not just what the words are saying, but also what the child is saying with their body. And I know that can be challenging, but that's definitely something that I really liked from this presentation. The positive affirmations for the kids.
Thank you, Ms. Santana. Yes, absolutely. And I think, again, it's just a matter of, taking a moment to practice these skills, because I think they are skills for the greater part. The ability to like recognize, again, to get into the habit of recognizing behaviors and describing them objectively without attaching any of your own feelings to them. It's going to help you tremendously. Okay, and then lastly, here's our helpline again. It's available Monday through Thursday, 9 to 4. It's available in English and in Spanish, and we have some digital resources, and you can find our Include and IncludeNYC website at the bottom of this slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alfonso. Jazz snaps to you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming to visit with our families, and share this information with us. This is a great kickoff for our families. This workshop is something that families have requested along the way, and the extra support, I think, is going to be phenomenal. Once you send me that PowerPoint, I'll definitely make sure to share it out with the family so that they can take some time. Do you also have that in Spanish, that PowerPoint?
Yes, you know what I'll do is I'm also going to send you uh, a set of tip sheets that have even
Beautiful.
more content and strategies that you can that you can all share with the families.
That's wonderful. That's great. That's great. So I'll share that out with the families this week. And so, folks, once again, IncludeNYC, we have some of their workshops built into our District 7 calendar, but I put their link in the chat. And I'll toss it in really quick. Give me like 2 seconds. There we go. Here is the link to their calendar so that you can catch some of their other free workshops. I also put in a document for our workshop tomorrow. We are doing a drummer's workshop where you are going to learn how to make drums out of things that are right there in your home. We are going to be playing some really cool cultural music, doing some cultural studies. So please join us tomorrow at 3:30. We'll be working with Excel Aerobics is the name of the company that will be working with us. They have worked with us in District 7 before, but I'm talking like, please don't feel like you have to go and buy anything. Like literally, they are so amazing. You can pick up a couple of things from around the home, probably sitting right next to you right now, and all of a sudden we will be our own drummers orchestra. Okay, so tomorrow 3:30, same link as of today, but the link is also inside of the flyer. I just put the flyer in the chat one more time. Thank you again, Alfonso. Thank you again to my parent coordinators and families
you
for
all.
coming today.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful Monday, and hopefully we will see you guys. Bring someone with you tomorrow. Let's increase our group. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.